Welcome everyone to our second episode. Super excited to have Timothy Motte with us today. We're going to be discussing all things startup scene. So before we get into the questions, I welcome Timothy, of course. I'm going to do a quick introduction and then we're going to get into the questions. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me, and very excited to do this.
Right. So Timothy Motte writes The Realistic Optimist. So this is a paid publication covering the recently globalized startup scene. So he publishes in-depth written interviews with startup founders and investors from around the world, really. So from Philippines to Uzbekistan, Morocco to Argentina. He believes that globalization of tech startups holds the immense potential for socio-economic progress. But with that progress, this will only be realized on the back of the quality information. So this is the quality information that the Realistic Optimist aims to produce. So previously, Tim co-founded Grow Home, which is a startup connecting Palestinian startup founders to investors and mentors in the Palestinian diaspora. So in this episode specifically, we'll explore what he's learned from covering the globalization of tech and what he believes to be the way forward. So welcome, Timothy. So excited for you to be here then.
Thank you very much.
All right. So firstly, let's get straight into the first question for you today is what inspired you to create the Realistic Optimist and how did your previous experiences with Grow Home influence this development?
Yeah. So I launched Grow Home at university. So I initially wanted to do international development. And as I read more and more books on the topic, I realized that the way development was being done a couple decades wasn't having the impact that the amount of money poured into it was supposed to, yield. And I figured that there was kind of this new way of thinking of just empowering local startups, local entrepreneurs, and that was kind of the most sustainable way of development. That's how most industrialized companies have developed by supporting their local industries, local entrepreneurs, local companies. And my best friend is Palestinian. And so we were looking at the case of Palestine and we were trying to figure out which segment of companies we could help or at least work with. And the startup scene was a good choice because it was small, so it was limited. It was easy to define. It was companies that had a tech product with kind of hyperscale ambitions. And when we were thinking of how to empower those Palestinian startups, we thought about the diaspora, so Palestinians living abroad who had both capital expertise and also an emotional affinity into their home country. And our hypothesis was that these diasporas were kind of starved of options to help back home or to contribute to their country's development. They had this overwhelming sense of guilt to being abroad, not being able to contribute to their country. And the only option offered to them today was, sending money back home to their family, which was good, but which wasn't satisfying necessarily everything they had to offer. And so the idea of Grow Home was to launch a platform that connected these Palestinian startups to investors and mentors in the diaspora. So we did that for about 2 years, learned a lot. The company didn't work for multiple reasons we can dive into. But what it taught me was that the tech startup phenomenon had globalized in the past 15 to 20 years. And that implied a lot of new complexities because the way you build a startup in Indonesia, Palestine, Argentina is not the same as in Silicon Valley. And more importantly, startups in these markets were facing challenges that startups in the so-called West had never faced. So currency appreciation, very unstable political situations, dire lack of infrastructure, lower buying power. And so the startup literature that had been written so far was adapted to a Western context and was not covering a lot of the problems they were facing. So that's what led to the creation of the Realistic Optimist to kind of produce that information.
Okay. Can you just talk a little bit of what the barriers to entry were? I imagine it was kind of the middleman between the local startups in Palestine and the diaspora investors, where you was then facilitating the collection of the money and then mobilizing the investment of that as well. Like what really happened then?
Yeah, so we started by just launching a very classic platform. So we kind of bought a white label Facebook group. So we had this app, which was basically a Facebook group, but no branding, and we'll just stick our branding onto that. And we got Palestinian founders to create accounts, Palestinian diasporas to create accounts, and then Palestinian founders could post in the feed, oh, we need this, we're looking for this, and then the diaspora could say, oh, I can help with this. And it was kind of very, very low-tech solutions. I think the mistake we made was wanting to move into enabling investment faster than necessary for two reasons. First is that I think diasporas needed time before they actually wanted to invest. So there's a difference between saying, oh, I'll help you, I'm interested in what you're doing, and saying, where do I sign? How do I send the money in? And there's really massive delta there. And I think we kind of underestimated that. And then secondly, we wanted to enable equity investments. So we wanted a Palestinian in San Francisco who worked in tech to invest in a Palestinian startup in Palestine without moving from their couch. There's that desire issue, which we realized was going to take longer than we thought. And second, regulatory speaking, infrastructure speaking, enabling an equity investment from a US angel investor to a Palestinian entity is a tough stone to lift. So I think we rushed that, and we spent so much time on that we eventually ran out of money and we had to shut it down.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, great concept, Mo. I love the idea. So let's move on to our second question today. What common challenges and opportunities have you observed in these emerging startup ecosystem? What are some of the specific obstacles that startups in emerging markets face, and how can they overcome them to achieve scalability and sustainability?
So the Realistic Optimist has a global scope. So I cover the globalized startup scene, and it so happens that most people in the world live in so-called emerging markets. So a vast majority of my coverage is on those markets. And one of the theses I'm pushing is that challenges within these markets are actually quite similar, even if the country is very geographically apart. So, for example, what a founder is doing to deal with hyperinflation in Argentina can be very useful to a founder in Lebanon who's dealing with the same issue, even though both countries are extremely far apart. And so, topic about common challenges, that's the entire point of the publication, is that challenges are actually quite common across these markets. And if I were to identify a couple ones, the first would be lack of infrastructure in physical, regulatory, and for example, to take a very concrete case, some startups want to do lending. And if you want to lend to an individual in the US, you probably can pull their credit score from somewhere. If you're trying to lend to someone in Pakistan who's unbanked, who doesn't really have any formal income statements or bank statements that you can tap, that doesn't have an official credit score, how do you determine whether you lend to that person or not? And so these startups in these markets have to build a lot of infrastructure in-house because it just doesn't exist yet, which is an extra cost, which once again startups in the West don't face. So I'd say lack of infrastructure, which is very broad. The second would be, I think, currency volatility, which once again isn't faced by a startup in the US or Europe, where the currency you make money in, it's not necessarily going to wildly fluctuate. But in Nigeria, for example, you can make money in Naira, and then that money suddenly appreciates. And so if you're buying stuff from the US, instantly the money you have in your bank accounts can buy you much less. If you raise from US investors, they might look at your financial results and say, well, maybe you went up in Naira, but in USD terms, you actually had a significant drop. And so we're not going to put money back into it. So, and that's, I think, a really common problem across all of the markets I cover. And then the third, I'd say, is this is more of a kind of ecosystem macro topic, but the lack of exits. So an exit is when a startup gets acquired or goes public, so a liquidity event. And if an ecosystem doesn't have prior exits to show for it, it's really hard to convince investors to put money into these startups because there's no track record of a venture investor making money on a startup investment in that country, which is one of the problems we faced in Palestine as well, where the ecosystem was so young and small geographically that investors didn't really have any track record of startup investments in Palestine yielding massive returns, which is completely normal because you can't shortcut it. You need at least 8 to 10 years to get significant liquidity events. And that's a really tough one. And to finish on that kind of adjacent challenge to that is one topic I've been exploring more and more are VCs, so startup specialized investors, have generally a 10-year fund life. So they raise money from what's called LPs, they deploy that money, and the agreement is after 10 years, and I think there's sometimes 2-year extensions, you're supposed to return the money to those LPs with ideally return. And I think that 10-year fund life has kind of been copy pasted from the American, the European context. And a lot of VCs in these markets are realizing that actually startup exits in those markets might take a bit longer than 10 years. And so they're a bit in a conundrum because they might have great startups in their portfolio that haven't exited yet, but the LPs are asking for money back. If the LPs don't get money back, the VC is going to have a really hard time raising another fund. And so I think that's kind of a novel challenge that VCs in these markets are facing.
Okay, so lots of interconnected issues that
100%. That's my thesis. I think that just as European startups can learn a ton from the US market, because once again, the socioeconomics are relatively similar, startups in Latin, Southeast Asia, Africa, Middle East can learn a ton from each other as well.
Can you elaborate on what the types of information are most crucial for these startups and their stakeholders? I think you mentioned it a little bit in terms of what Realistic Optimist does in terms of making sure that we have the right information. Can really just elaborate a bit more on that?
So the way the Realistic Optimists or the format it produces are in-depth written interviews, and I try to get as much operational insight I can from the founder or the investor. When it comes to what information they need, I think it's founders and investors might not need the same thing. Investors might need what they call comparables. So if they're going to invest in a startup, they need to value that startup to know what percentage of the company is their investment going to be worth. So they're going to try to find companies that have done similar things and see what they are valued. And in these markets, if they're investing in a startup that is pioneering a specific field, they might not have any local comparables until they have to go look for comparables across different markets. That isn't necessarily something I provide. It's more of a big data play. And for startups, I think what's valuable is just very operational insights into, once again, how founders in similar markets are dealing with challenges that have never been faced by startups in the US or Europe. So when a founder explains how he got his regulatory license from the Venezuelan regulator, that can be very useful to an Ethiopian founder who's also looking to get their license from the Ethiopian regulator. If a founder in Kenya or in Nigeria explains how the government floating the currency impacted their business, that can be very useful to a founder in another country whose government also just floated their currency. And so I would say investors are looking for more data, numbers, and then founders are looking for more operational, very concrete know-how of how founders navigate certain challenges.
Okay, so I know we spoke a bit about the challenges and opportunities. Maybe let's talk a bit more about opportunities that you see or currently perceive currently in the emerging startup scene.
I mean, my entire thesis is that these companies have the potential to create exceptional socioeconomic progress because they are companies that are founded by local founders who know the market like the back of their hand, and who, most importantly, and that's a critique that's level at the aid industry, they have skin in the game because it's their country, which is not the case of a US graduate student coming to Kenya for 2 years, and if their aid project doesn't work, they'll just go back to New York and get a job. A founder in Kenya who's from Kenya, they have a bigger incentive, a bigger attachment to the problem they're solving, and yeah, I mean, the overarching opportunity I see is just the fact that tech startups are founded by local people, employing local talent, solving local problems, all within the envelope of tech, which is by definition scalable and more scalable than any other solution. It's not the solution to everything, but it brings exceptional value and scale. So yeah, this is the opportunity I see.
Amazing. So I guess the takeaway is that despite the challenges, we do see some opportunities here. We've spoken about the fact that there's an opportunity to kind of localize solutions by the local communities, which is great. There's also an untapped market at the level in many industries like fintech, agri-tech, edtech, or health tech have massive unmet needs, particularly in the emerging markets in arena. There's also a growing middle class and youth population as well, which we see particularly in Africa, Asia, etc., where a young tech-savvy population presents a strong customer base as well and a vibrant workforce. And then lastly, also, we can see lower operational costs as well be something to look forward to here compared to, as you're saying, the Europe, the US, or developed ecosystems. The cost of labor is often more affordable.
No, it's relative because if you're making money in local currency,
Yes.
then it kind of evens out. And I would argue, as I said earlier, that these founders have to build some infrastructure from the ground up, which actually can end up being more expensive. So I wouldn't necessarily say that's a massive advantage. Where it can be an advantage is if a startup has a local labor cost base and then sells maybe a SaaS to companies abroad. That can be
Yes.
it.
And then in terms of the next question, rather than applying a one-size-fits-all strategy from established markets, Julius advocated more for the local leadership in building sustainable ecosystems. And can you share some examples of successful locally driven startup models that you've come across?
Yeah, and every company I cover is by definition solving a local issue. A few examples. One of the companies I covered is called Lemon in Argentina. And what they're doing is they're enabling Argentinian people to convert their pesos, which is rapidly devaluating, depreciating. And that is a problem if your savings account is in pesos and in 3 months it's worth a fraction of what it was and you can't really do anything about it, and that destroys your buying power. What Lemon allows you to do is convert that pesos into a stablecoin. So a stablecoin is a cryptocurrency pegged to real world fiat currency. In their case, they're using US dollars. And so that means that as an Argentinian, you get paid in pesos, you can buy stablecoin. And so your savings account is pegged to the US dollar. And so it doesn't depreciate in value as it would if you just keep in pesos.
Okay, well, that's really great. So in your view, how can the globalization of tech startups drive socio-economic progress, particularly in underrepresented regions?
Well, I just think that startups are maybe the most viable vehicle for building part of that infrastructure, because once again, local founders, many times founders that could be doing something else entirely, and a lot of the founders I cover have or could be working a finance job on Wall Street, and they decide to come home and build something difficult. And so they have massive skin in the game. Once again, tech acts as a great scaling mechanism, which didn't exist before. So if you crack a solution, crack a business model, crack a product, you can distribute that product with very low distribution costs to a very large amount of people. And yeah, that's I just see it as more sustainable than foreign technical aid consultants coming in and laying out grand plans and then leaving 5 years after. We saw how fragile the aid industry with US aid tobacco. So you just can't, a country cannot rely on just foreign expertise and be a continuous inflow of foreign capital, which is liable to stop anytime. And so local tech startups are there for the long term and building locally. They're raising money locally, hiring local talent, and most of the time they're also bringing foreign capital into the market, which is awesome.
And I completely agree with you. I think the globalization of these startups can be a very powerful thing. I think now with the AI, with opportunities there to really leverage these solutions to kind of solve the issues that we face.
I would add as well, I think that if you take, once again, the long-term impact these companies are having, I think one of the most exciting things these founders do is heavily lobby politically. So they need political buy-in. They need the regulator to change the laws to adapt to what they're doing. And I think that creates kind of a public policy vitality and yeah, just moves the lines, kind of pushes policymakers into action, which I think just creates a more vital kind of public policy making process.
But with the policy as well, we have to be very careful because we don't want to over-regulate, because we've seen some examples in the emerging markets here that over-regulation really stifles or chills the innovation. All right, so in terms of misconceptions, what are some of the biggest misconceptions global investors have?
A lot of founders say that foreign investors kind of stop at the macro headlines of a country and just write it off from there. So they'll see Pakistan, they say, oh, the currency is unstable and the politics are unstable, so there's no way this is ever going to work.
Mhm.
And I think what founders will say is, sure, we founders figure out ways to make it work. That's why you're investing. And the size of the market, the size of the opportunity, the number of industries to digitalize is so massive that you can't just stop at two Bloomberg headlines and say, oh, impossible. Obviously, it would be naive to say go to Pakistan and make US style VC returns. I think that is also doesn't make sense. But I think there's a lot of room for kind of the intermediary. And what I was saying with the VCs realizing maybe the 10-year fund structure wasn't adapted. I think there's a lot of exciting work to do there to adapt kind of the model to specific local situations.
Right, as well, we spoke about the geopolitical tension there as well. Like, how do we realistically fix that? How can we change these misconceptions?
It's interesting you say that because one of the topics that's been of great interest to me recently is the topics of sanctions. So this applies to a very small or like a subset of the markets I cover, but some markets I cover are just battered by US sanctions for no good reason. And so I did the piece with a guy who runs a startup accelerator in Khartoum, and who was saying that basically they overthrew the dictator in 2019, al-Bashir, and the US removed a lot of the blanket sanctions that hadn't been put on the country during the al-Bashir years. And what he was saying is that even though the sanctions were taken out, a lot of big tech companies weren't updating their policy because they didn't want to take a risk, they didn't want to think it through, and that ended up really hurting the Sudanese private sector because they couldn't do a bunch of stuff, connect to the global banking system, buy stuff from abroad, buy tech products from abroad. And I think, yeah, that approach comes from a willful ignorance, like, oh, too complicated to figure out. Let's just say no to all of them. It's the same with Syria recently. So obviously they also overthrew the dictator. I know a guy who's working really hard to get their startup ecosystem back on track. And one of the main issues is going to be the lifting of sanctions, because if there are sanctions in place, you can't get foreign investment. And in an ecosystem like Syria, there's not enough local capital to fund the ecosystem as it starts. And the other alternative is aid money, but aid money comes with strings attached. At the end of the day, it's a political play. And so the money they spend is to satisfy their own goals, which can sometimes coincide with local ambitions, but they're not spending money based on what the local startup ecosystem needs at this time. It's public money, it's taxpayer money. They're pursuing a specific agenda. And so, just circling back, that's why you need to have sanctions, so you can have inflow of private capital, but isn't scared to invest.
And as the startup landscape continues to globalize, what shifts do you anticipate in terms of how investors, policymakers, and entrepreneurs approach to building these thriving ecosystems?
I really think the diasporas returning to build back home is super, super interesting. I would say a decent majority of the founders I cover, once again, are people from higher socioeconomic classes who have either studied, worked in the West and are willfully coming back. to build a startup back home. And that's another reason why I think startups is such a powerful vehicle, because I think they are probably the most potent magnet for returning diaspora talent. And that goes back to the idea I had with Grow, which is tapping the skills and capital of the diaspora. I think startup ecosystems in these countries are fantastic magnets to pull that diaspora talent back, which is, fundamental. Obviously, it's not a panacea. Countries like Nigeria, Pakistan are still facing immense brain drain. But I do think startups are, fantastic magnet to bring that talent back.
Okay. Right. Lastly, how can our listeners support the globalization of tech startups and contribute to the dissemination of quality information in the space?
It depends what sector you're working in, but I would say the first step is learning about what's happening, and learning about what's happening in a very pragmatic, nuanced, and factual view. So understanding that people are building in these markets, they're building companies, they're making money, they're facing challenges. The idea is not to have grand narratives of tech startups solving the world, but more, and not having the alternative view of, helping startup operate in a market like Libya or Pakistan that has so many problems. It's just a middle ground. These markets are difficult. They have their challenges. They also have exceptional founders working really hard to figure it out. And attention should be given to these people, understanding what challenges they're facing, seeing if you in your position can contribute in one way or another. The sanctions thing is, a great example. And I would say the first step is really deeply learning about what's happening so that you have a very informed view of what you can do, what you can't do, take it from there.
And just to ask your opinion on how important do you think prioritizing ESG or impact investing, that kind of framework is in the work of these emerging startups? You spoke about the information that you provide to the founders and investors who are there obviously looking for opportunities to then invest, and how important is this information of ESG?
I think it's a very important question, because I think in a lot of the markets I cover, there's a lot of Western investors coming in with their impact agenda and explaining to local founders that they're an impact investor, and so they're only going to invest in impact. What I think they get wrong, and what I think is violently unfair, is that they're the ones defining what they deem as impactful in the country that isn't theirs. And I think the best people positioned to determine what is impactful is the people whose country it is. And so the idea of impact is extremely subjective. And since it is so subjective, the people who should be arbitraging and deciding what is impactful are people building in their own countries, not a Western government or a Western impact investor that has their own ideas that can be good or not good. But for me, that's besides the point. It's not their country. They don't know the market as well as local founders do. They don't know the challenges as well as local founders do. Once again, they are less attached to those markets, so they don't have as much skin in the game. So ESG important, impact important, but let the local founders decide what they deem impactful.
100%. So very powerful what you're saying. Yes, ESG is important, but it's localized to actually solve the solutions on the ground.
And just let the people building decide what's impactful. You can't decide from Paris what's impactful for African founders. That makes no sense. Absolutely no sense. And it has some very problematic undertones, which are wrapped in kind of impact investing. I think it's quite dangerous rhetoric. Let the African founders building decide what they need money for, and let them decide their impact objectives. Don't decide them from Paris.
Why do you think that entails that a mismatch of incentives for the investors who are sitting in Paris, for example, who are trying to push a certain agenda versus actually solving the real issues that they are investing in? What is the mismatch between the two agendas?
Yeah, I think there's probably a really problematic reality to that of European countries in particular deciding what is good for the global South's development. And I think the problem is that it's their money, so they feel entitled to decide what is suitable for. But I'd rather they have a more honest view of, it's our money, so we want you to do that, rather than it's our money, we want to impact your continent, and this is what you should be building to have impact on your continent. I think is a horrible take.
Yeah.
I think local founders should decide what their ecosystem needs, and if an impact investor is really investors, they should let the people building this find impact. I think it's a bit too easy to come in and say, "Oh, we think your country needs this." No, you don't know. You're not the best person to know.
Yes.
But yeah.
Completely agree. So you inferred it here first. Local founders should have the right to say this is what we need in our community to kind of fix these issues. So thank you so much, Timothy, for being with us today. So before we close off, just to kind of summarize in terms of the conversation today. So overall, we have had an in-depth discussion on the effect of globalization on the startup scene. We've discussed the challenges as well as the opportunities. We know that globalization can and make the startup ecosystems more interconnected, inclusive, and resilient. We have discussed some challenges such as related barriers as well as infrastructure gaps. Just again here in terms of just to have a think about the role of the government and the DFIs here, particularly in the A's where we see the cut of the A, when we see the need to kind of make money flow into these markets here, which are particularly liquid. So it's quite crucial for a government to support, to fund these initiatives and also have the legislative framework that enable these players to kind of work in an innovative way. So yeah, in closing, I just want to say, as the world of startups continues to globalize, the opportunities for innovation and inclusion impact are limitless. By fostering collaboration between investors, policymakers, entrepreneurs, we can build ecosystems that drive real socio-economic progress. So especially in the underrepresented regions. So let's keep pushing boundaries. Let's keep creating solutions and leaving no one behind. So until next time, keep innovating for a better world. Thank you so much, Timothy, for being with us today. Go check out his website, Realistic Optimist. Thank you so much. Any last closing words on your side?
Yeah, I would say maybe the closing words is to think less in terms of grand macro trends and more granular understanding of what's happening in the situations, understand the people building, understand what very precise operational day-to-day challenges they're facing, instead of stopping at very broad headlines that either decide if a sector is super hot or super cold or doomed to fail. Go a bit deeper, learn about the people building in the space, learn about the challenge it takes, and they're the best ones positioned to determine whether something works or doesn't.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Timothy. That's it from us today, and see you guys next time.